Hey guys, have you ever wondered which would work better on your bike, an air shock or a coil shock? If so, one of the things that can help you start to answer that question is knowing the leverage ratio curve for your bike. Today I'm going to show you how to accumulate the data and calculate the leverage ratio curve. I'm going to show you using my Intense Taser. This bike has the leverage ratio curve readily available, out on the internet. But I'm going to accumulate the data and do the calculation and then compare it against the online data so that you can see that this process will get you relatively close to the actual leverage ratio curve. So let's get to it. So here I have my taser all set up to accumulate the data to do the calculation. As you can see, I have the bike attached in a park tool stand, and I have a bike stand holding the front wheel. Now, down below here, I want to point out that it's important that the bike, when you start moving the rear triangle, you don't want the bike to move up. So I actually put a piece, the white piece is a piece of whiteboard, and what I did on the whiteboard, I attached the park tool stand to the whiteboard. Also, I'm going to use a floor jack. The floor jack's pretty heavy and it's on the whiteboard, and the idea is that when the floor jack starts to press up against the triangle, starts to press up against the axle in the triangle, the bike will not move out of the stand, or will not move very much in the stand, and all that will be moving is the rear triangle. So what I also found was that the best way to do this calculation is to move the rear triangle by a set amount each time. And what I did here, this is a piece of just aluminum flat bar, and I have marked it in 20 millimeter increments here. I'm not sure how good you can see that, but in 20 millimeter increments. I also put a little marker, taped a marker onto the back of the rear triangle, and what will happen is this is basically set so that this is right at the bottom of the rear triangle, and what I'll do is I jack it up. I will jack it up and stop it at each 20 millimeter increment, and then when it stops at each 20 millimeter increment, I'll go up to the rear shock here, and we'll actually calculate. Take a caliper, and I have a little mark there on the rear, on the shock, and we'll go in and we'll calculate or record a measurement each time I move the triangle. So it's starting at 55 millimeters, and this is a 185 by 55 trunnion shock, and so that's a good starting point. So now what I'm going to do is come in the back here, and I'm going to, by the way, let me just show you how I have the jack set up. I have the jack set up here, and I have a piece of PVC pipe just in between the jack and the axle. And what I do when I press that up, it'll push the rear triangle up. Also, one of the things that I noticed here, the stiction can be kind of bad, so you need to break it free before you start doing the, pressing it down. But basically, at this point, I'm starting right at the bottom of my chart there, and let me see here if you can get it down so you can see. I'm starting right here at the bottom of the chart. I'm going to take the floor jack and I'm going to jack the back of the bike up until I get to to the first mark there. So I've moved the rear shock or the rear triangle up by 20 millimeters. And then what I'll do is I'll go in here now at the shock, and I will take my caliper here and look at the caliper on that, and what I'm sitting at is 49 millimeters, pretty close, 49 millimeters, and I'll go in and I will record that here. I got a piece of paper where I'm showing the rear triangle, the beginning, and each time I go down by 20. And the shock reading over here was 49. I started at 55. And so what I've done here, I've moved, it's gone down, and I recorded my 49. And I'm going to do that for all 20 changes, and I'll fill it in, and then I'll come back and show you the results here. Okay, at this point I've gone through and gotten all the measurements, and as you can see here, I filled them in my chart here, and I'm going to go in and plot them in a little bit more on a spreadsheet so that you can see, and then I'll overlay that with the actual chart that's online, and you can see how close this method will get you. So once you finish accumulating the data, I'm showing in the chart what the data looks like. So in the first column, the change in the rear triangle was 20 millimeters each time. And in the second column, this shows the remaining compression in the rear triangle. When I started out, I had 155 millimeters of compression. When I compressed at 20, I went down to 35, etc. I measured the remaining distance on the shock. I started at 55. After the first 20 millimeter compression of the rear triangle, I was down to 49, etc. So then you calculate the leverage ratio, which 155 divided by 55 gives you 2.82. 135 by 49 gives you 2.76, and on down the line. So those are your calculated leverage ratios. This chart just shows, if I take the data, the leverage ratios using the information or the measurements I took, starting with the 2.82, and line it up with the leverage ratio which is shown on the chart in the internet. The 2.82 corresponds to a 2.92, the 2.76 corresponds to a 2.97, etc., all the way down. If I then take the data that I calculated and the data provided on the internet and put both of them on a graph, this will show the leverage ratio curve. The blue line is the one that I calculated, and the red line is the internet. And as you can see, although the lines are different, they're both showing the same general pattern, and that is that the leverage ratio curve is not flat, but it has a curve in it, meaning that the leverage ratio curve for this bike is progressive. So that's how I accumulate the data and calculate the leverage ratio curve for a bike. As you can see, it's not an exact science. There's a lot of areas where the calculation could get a little bit off. But I think if you follow the general procedure that I followed, you'll get a curve that's close enough that you can tell if the bike has a progressive or a linear or an inverse curve, and then that will help you decide whether it makes sense to have an air shock or a coil shock. Anyway, I hope I've given you something to think about, and I'll see you guys at the top.